Welcome, Oliver.
Thank you for the invitation, Florian.
Oliver and I have a long common history. We know each other for many decades. Oliver and I started digital signage invidis 15 years ago. It's an anniversary now this year. Yeah, it's anniversary year. So it's a special honor for us to have you here and to talk a little bit about what has happened in the past 15 years. No, we won't talk about too much about that, but about the real life experience from out there and what integrators experience and how technology really helps and where it's just sounds good on paper. Why do you think is it still so popular? Are there still challenges with high brightness, or what is the thing about?
It's very interesting for us and for the customers as well. I mean, when do I recommend to use an LED? I mean, mostly it's in conference room situations. So customers look at their current installation and see that it's maybe an old projection system. So, and then they want a bigger canvas, but they don't want any bezels there. So they decide to go with an display system because it's bright, it's self-illuminated, so it's a much better picture than with traditional projectors, as long as you don't spend 50,000–60,000 euros for a projector. So that's the reason. First, it's the size. So the size, and then you have to decide, can we use special video wall displays, but then you still have this very small bezel. So for instance, we installed a year ago a Barco Uni-C system. It's not cheap, it's pretty expensive, superb quality of the displays, but you still have this slight bezel. And if you don't want to have this, you have to go with LED. And then the question is, what pixel pitch? In what size? And of course, people, they read all the magazines or the articles, and then they think in resolutions of 4K. And if you do a 4K video wall with a huge canvas, it's an insane amount of money you have to spend. Still, you have to spend. So what we have to discuss with the customer is: do we really need this high resolution, or do we stick with full HD resolution because it fits most of the laptop displays?
And that's usually the source, to be honest.
Yes.
It's not the Blu-ray or whatever or a great thing. It's a computer, which is usually the source.
Yes, definitely, and I think it won't change so fast in the future. So then you go with LED, and then it depends on where does the audience sit. So what is the distance from the first viewer to the screen, and based on this, you calculate what kind of pixel pitch you need. I mean, you can go down to, 0.8, something like that. So the wall from Samsung and other competitors, but it's still very, very expensive. So you mostly, then we recommend a pixel pitch of 1.2 millimeters. And it's amazing, we did this installation in our headquarter at Cancom, and we have on one side a 110-inch 1.2 millimeters LED video wall, and on the other side there is a 98-inch Samsung display. The 98-inch has a 4K resolution, and then on the other side you have the full HD LED wall. And if you have the same picture on both displays, the LED is so outstanding from the brightness, and we regulated it down, the brightness maybe to half of it, but it's so clear and the colors are so vivid, so you think the LED would be the 4K picture and not the Samsung display.
But also the price is a multitude of obviously of a 98-inch screen, huh?
That's true. I mean, it's I think 4 to 5 times the price point of a 98-inch display. And you have always to consider that the installation efforts are much higher. So it's, I mean, we now see the new systems from maybe LG with a magnet all-in-one things. So that makes it much easier to install. But after that, you have to calibrate the wall, so it's much more labor involved building an LED wall than just hanging an LCD display on the wall.
Interesting enough, most LED manufacturers now offer these all-in-one solutions. So I think also the wall is part of this. You know, you get everything, including brackets and everything. But it makes a big difference. Talking about LED and micro LED. You mentioned already 1.2. That's I mean, you can have it as SMD and a micro LED, but the micro LED, the price point it has dropped dramatically. And it seems to be a very attractive thing between 1.2 and 1.6 mil.
I think it's very attractive nowadays, but I have to admit that from my perspective as an integrator, for us it's more important to look at the specs in order or regarding how can we install it. Is it easy to install? Do we have a lot of defects when we install it? I mean, this happens all the time. Well, I mean, it's still very fragile. So if you build the whole LED wall, for us it's very important that it's I would say fail-proof, that our technicians, even they're educated and certificated for this, that's easy for them, cabling, stability of the single panels and of the cabinets, so that we don't damage the wall. And I think this is something, even for the customers in their daily use, because people tend to tap the wall and put their finger on that you have something with a coating, that the edges are very stable. I think that's even more important than the technology behind it. But from my perspective, you only see the difference when you have it side by side. So as long as you don't have this, you're fine with a regular 1.2 millimeter and then standard technology.
Before we talked about LED and LCD, I want to talk about collaboration boards. I mean, that's a product of 2020, obviously, you know, with Teams and Zoom and everything. So how has the market changed? How has demand changed? And are the products which are on the market, do they really solve the demand of customers?
Oh, that's a hard question. Beginning with our demand, we have seen a growing demand in the last 12 to 18 months. Even before COVID, customers started thinking about how to use displays for collaboration with teams, not in one place, but maybe in different locations or countries. And the demand definitely has grown for this kind of technology. And of course, with all the COVID situation, people using video conference systems and still want to use interactive displays, the demand even grow more for interactive displays or collaboration boards or whiteboards or however our customers call them. But the biggest challenge is if a customer approaches us, he says, okay, I need something, I need a whiteboard. So my first question is, okay, what is the use case behind it? What do you want to do? Just drawing some stuff on it or writing on it? Or do you need some precise touch technology, maybe for technical people, for technical drawings? Do you want to use a dedicated software for this? And from this point, we try to specify the use case. Because what people do at the moment is they see a Microsoft Surface Hub.
Yeah. It looks very sexy, to be honest.
It looks sexy. The technology is amazing. It's an all-in-one device, and the user interface is incredible good. Yeah. So people see this when we do some proof of concept. They get the demo equipment, and then we have two issues. A couple of months ago, first issue was it's too small. It's just 50.1 inch. Now we have the 85 or 86 inch version of this.
Which is less sexy, obviously. It looks more like a standard screen.
It's less sexy and it's the price point is, it's very high, I would say. So what people want is like they want the functionality of a Microsoft Surface Hub, but with another device. So then we come to a point where we say, okay, we can provide a touch screen with different touch technologies. This is PCAP, infrared, in-glass touch, whatsoever, depending on how precise it should be and what the performance is. And then we come to the other point, so what do you want to do with it? So do you want to use Teams? That's pretty easy. You attach like a video soundbar below or above it, and then you have your laptop attached to it. Or maybe you want an OPS PC with the software running on it. So that's one point, and then sometimes I come up with the cheapest version of it. It's like an infrared model with a built-in Android.
It's more for schools, right? More for education, or?
It's also suitable for corporates, but then you have to keep in mind that when you use this kind of display without a laptop, so with a built-in software, you are working in an Android environment. So how do you get all your data on the display? So can you integrate this Android device into your network environment? And if you create something on your whiteboard, where do you store it? Most people want it then in their OneNote, or want to use it in a PowerPoint, or want to reuse it. So with most of the interactive whiteboards, which are based on Android, the file you export is either a PDF, a JPEG, or interactive whiteboard format, which is kind of proprietary, so you don't have a software to then work with this kind of data. So these are the important questions we have to ask. And if a customer says, I want to integrate this in my Office 365, I want to use my OneNote or my Microsoft Whiteboard application, and I want it in Teams, then we always say, okay, don't use an Android system. It's, of course, sometimes it's also a security issue. Many IT people don't want Android devices in their network because they can't manage it. And then there's always a question, built-in OPS PC with a Windows on it, or with a bring your own device concept, you attach your laptop. And then nowadays you have the question, do you use USB-C or use USB-A with an HDMI cable? So it gets much more complicated. And from the beginning, when they said, I want a whiteboard, you have totally different specifications at the end when you talk to the customer. So then you come up with a totally different solution. So it's very complex, and it takes a while to go through all the different possibilities. And then, of course, people always say, I want to try out this hardware. And then what you normally do is like proof of concept. And then hopefully you don't have to provide an 86-inch, but maybe a 55-inch, otherwise it gets too expensive.
You talked about the role of the integrator, and especially general contracting. Life has changed a lot, huh? The role of integrator. It was, is it today, how is integration business different to 5 years ago? I believe it's less hardware, I assume, and more, maybe not in your case, but in general, and more services? Or what is general contracting all about, and what does it include nowadays?
So I can't say how it was 5 years ago. I started
at
three and a half years ago, yeah. But I think it's changing dramatically. I mean, even if I look at CANCOM, I think 5 years ago, I wouldn't say it was kind of a box-moving business, but of course the focus was on hardware and licensing sales. We still have this, and of course it's an easy business. You make the offer, you sell the hardware and the software license, but nowadays everything integrates. It's not a silo anymore. We always talked about silos, so in software mostly. But nowadays you have this with hardware as well. Looking at the video conference market, people want to use Teams, and then they also want to use Zoom, or they want to use WebEx with the same device. Then they want to have it as a room system, or they want to have a bring your own device concept as well. So this means that it's not only the display and the video codec, but it's also media technology, AV equipment you have to provide. Then it gets more complicated. Then you need control systems with a touch panel. So you have to program this. You have to create user interfaces which are designed for the special purpose. You have always different users. For one, it's very easy to use this. Others, they're totally helpless if there are 2 buttons. They just want 1 button. So it gets more complicated, and often you have like an IT component attached to it. So it's not only AV technology, but also IT technology. So we have to talk to the IT people. And then everything starts integrating. And at the end, maybe you want to have like a management system overall, where you can say, okay, if there's a failure in this room, nobody has to go there, but you can do some things remotely. So it gets much more complicated, which means that in most of the projects we do, we have kind of a concept and planning phase. Then we have a phase where we try something out, and then there is the rollout. But it's not box moving anymore, because everything is at the end like a little computer attached to the internet and communicating with the other systems. So it's much more complicated.
But the general contractor, you're still responsible for the whole thing. I mean,
yes.
At the end of the day, they call you if something doesn't work, regardless if it was supplied by you or not. But as long as they feel it's your responsibility, they will make. Yeah.
Of course, and services and maintenance is, of course, not a big challenge, but it is a challenge, and it's more often asked for by the customers, because when even if it's digital signage or is it AV technology and conference room, people spend a lot of money. They have a lot of touch points or rooms, and what they want is that the system is up and running. So and
many different users, right?
And many different users.
That's also a challenge, They're not all of them, got a training or so. They expect it to operate it just by a press of a button, and that's it. And unfortunately, that's not the case. It's too complicated.
It's not the case. It's too complicated, but it's always a wish to have a very complex system and a very easy usability, and that's hard to accomplish. Therefore, we have to put in a lot of consultant work. We have to program things. We have to test out things ourselves. So it's a lot of effort for just a couple of rooms.
Interesting. Thank you, Oliver, for being here today, and it was really interesting to get a better understanding of the other side of the business, because we at invidis, we just look at the larger stories, obviously, and so thank you for coming to our show today.
Thank you for the invitation, Florian. It was a pleasure.